You are sitting across from a doctor. The room is quiet in the specific way. Rooms get quiet right before someone says a word you don't want to hear. We found something, they say. Your stomach drops before they finish the sentence. For most of human history, this exact moment almost never happened. Not because your ancestors were superhuman, not because cancer is some modern curse invented by stop sinks and processed food, even though that's the version of the story that goes viral. The real explanation is stranger, more layered, and honestly more useful to you than a simple villain. And so what was actually different, and how much of it is still within your control today? Let's start with the bones, because bones are where this story usually begins. In the late 2000s, two researchers, Egyptologist Rosalie David and paleopathologist Michael Zimmerman, examined a wide collection of ancient Egyptian mummies and earlier skeletal remains, specifically searching for signs of malignant tumors, the medical term for cancers that invade and spread through the body. What they found was startling by modern standards. Cancer markers in ancient remains were rare. Not absent, but strikingly uncommon compared to what you'd expect in a modern population of similar size. Zimmerman went so far as to argue that cancer rates appeared to climb sharply only after industrialization, when human environments changed faster than human bodies could. That finding made headlines race. It also needs a caveat the kind serious researchers always attach and pop science usually strips away. Most cancers never touch bone at all. A tumor in the lungs, the liver, or soft tissue can kill a person and leave their skeleton looking completely untouched thousands of years later. So when archaeologists say ancient skeletons show little cancer, they are mostly describing bone cancer and cancers that have spread in the bone, not cancer overall. The full picture is murkier than they simply didn't get it. There's also the matter of sample size. Zimmerman and David were working with what survived a few hundred mummies and skeletons out of untold millions of people who actually lived and died across thousands of years of ancient Egyptian history. A handful of confirmed cases, a handful of absences, neither one is a complete census. Other paleopathologists, examining different skeletal collections from different regions and eras, have pushed back on the idea that ancient cancer was vanishingly rare, pointing to documented cases of bone tumors and remains from ancient Peru, medieval Britain, and Bronze Age Europe. The honest summary sits somewhere in the middle. Cancer existed in the ancient world, but the specific kinds that leave a mark on bone do appear to show up less often in the remains researchers have examined than you'd expect from a modern population of similar size. Here's where it gets more interesting, because skeletons aren't the only evidence available. Researchers don't have to guess what ancestral life looked like. In some places, they can watch a version of it happening right now. For more than 2 decades, anthropologist Hillard Kaplan and his colleagues have run what's known as the Taimani Health and Life History Project, following an indigenous forager, horticulturalist population in the Bolivian Amazon who farm small plots, hunt fish, and walk far more than the average person in an industrialized country. Among older Tsimane adults, Kaplan's team has documented dramatically lower rates of several cancers strongly linked to lifestyle in wealthier nations, alongside strikingly low rates of heart disease and the kind of arterial buildup that quietly kills so many people decades earlier elsewhere. This isn't a story about people dying too young to get sick. Many too many adults who survive childhood live into their 60s, 70s, and beyond. They're simply getting certain diseases far less often along the way. Why? Not magic. Movement mostly. And food. A.T. Samani adult walks, paddles, farms, and hunts for hours, most days generating activity levels that would exhaust someone used to a desk in a car. Their diet leans heavily on whole, unprocessed plant foods, fish, and game, with almost none of the refined sugar, industrial seed oils, or ultra-processed ingredients that dominate a modern grocery cart. Earlier comparative work on the Hadza of Tanka and the Juhonsi, sometimes called the Kung of the Kalahari, conducted by researchers including anthropologist Michael Gervin, found similar patterns. Once you survive the dangerous years of early childhood, a hunter-gatherer life tends to deliver a surprisingly long, surprisingly cardiovascular. Cancer doesn't vanish in these communities. It simply shows up far less often than the diseases of comfort and convenience that define so much of modern mortality. It's worth being precise about what Kaplan's team actually measured, because the numbers are part of what makes this so compelling. Coronary artery calcification, a buildup that signals hardening arteries and predicts future heart attacks, showed up in the Tsimane population at roughly a fifth the rate researchers would expect in an age-matched American population. Some Tsimane men in their 80s had arteries that scored as essentially healthy by clinical standards, a result almost never seen in industrialized countries at that age. Cancer figures followed a similar shape. Certain cancers tightly linked to obesity, inactivity, and processed diets in wealthy nations, including several common forms found in the colon and breast, appeared at notably reduced rates among the Tsimane, even adjusting for the fact that fewer Tsimane individuals reach the very oldest age brackets where cancer risk climbs the highest. So picture this directly, because it's easier to understand as a scene than as a statistic. A.T. Tsimane man in his 60s wakes before dawn. He walks several kilometers to a fishing spot, hauls in a day's catch, then works a small garden plot of manioc and rice under direct sun for another 2 hours. His evening meal is fish, a starchy root vegetable, and whatever fruit is in season, eaten without a label, a bakar, or an ingredient list longer than the food itself. His blood pressure, when researchers test it, looks closer to a healthy 30-year-old in an industrialized country than to a man his own age back home. None of this was a deliberate health regimen. It was simply what staying fed and sheltered required every single day for his entire life. Now here's the twist, the part that complicates the easy version of this story. People like to tell. Cancer overwhelmingly correlates with age. Most mutations that eventually cause a tumor accumulate slowly across decades, the result of cells copying their DNA millions upon millions of times, and occasionally making an error that survives. The longer a body runs, the more chances those errors get to compound. Modern medicine, sanitation, and vaccination have done something genuinely radical. They've made it normal for people to survive into their 70s, 80s, and 90s, ages where cancer becomes statistically far more likely. Ancient and indigenous populations have always faced their own brutal filters on survival. Just different ones. Infectious disease, childbirth complications, violent conflict, and starvation all kill people earlier and far more frequently than they do in a country with antibiotics and clean water. A body that doesn't live to 70 doesn't get the same opportunity to accumulate 70 years of cellular copying errors. Cancer biologist Mel Graves, who has spent much of his career studying cancer's evolutionary origins, describes many of today's most common cancers as mismatched diseases, conditions driven less by inevitable biology and more by a collision between ancient human bodies and a completely novel modern environment. Diets dense in refined carbohydrates, chronic low-grade inflammation for most of human history that simply did not exist for most of human history that simply did not exist for most of human history. What does a mismatched disease actually look like in practice? Take breast cancer as one example Greaves has written about directly. Risk rises with a longer lifetime exposure to certain hormones, which in turn is heavily influenced by age at first, menstruation, number of pregnancies, and duration of messing. Compare a modern woman in an industrialized country who on average starts menstruating earlier due to childhood nutrition, has fewer children, and breastfeeds for shorter periods against an ancestral or modern hunter-gatherer woman who typically starts menstruating later, has more pregnancies spaced further apart, and breastfeeds for years rather than months. The biology hasn't changed. The pattern of life surrounding that biology has changed enormously, and the disease risk has shifted right along with it. So it isn't one clean explanation. It's at least three forces tangled together. Your ancestors and the people living ancestral adjacent lifestyles today face fewer of the specific risk factors strongly tied to modern cancer rates. Things like obesity, chronic inactivity, ultra-processed diets, tobacco, and certain environmental carcinogens. Many of them also didn't survive long enough for slow accumulating mutations to fully express themselves as disease. Not because their bodies were stronger, but because the other threats reached them first. And the archaeological record, while suggestive, is genuinely limited by the simple fact that most cancers leave no mark on bone at all. What does any of this actually mean for you, sitting in your own modern life with its modern comforts and modern risks? Not that you should abandon medicine, sanitation, or the conveniences that let most of us reasonably expect to see old age in the first place. Those things are unambiguous wins. It means something closer to this. A meaningful slice of cancer risk isn't fixed by your genes or your bad luck. It's shaped by daily inputs that look almost exactly like a tomato man's ordinary Tuesday, moving your body for hours, not minutes. Eating food that resembles what it started as, limiting the things, tobacco chief among them, that introduced damage your ancestors simply never had to defend against. None of that guarantees anything. Biology doesn't deal in guarantees. But it shifts odds, the same odds researchers keep finding shifted in populations who, by circumstance rather than intention, are still living closer to the conditions your body evolved for. You are sitting across from a doctor. The room is quiet, but this time picture a different version of that scene years from now where the conversation never needs to start with dread at all. Not because cancer has been erased, but because you spent the years before it doing the one thing your ancestors did almost by accident and you now get to do on purpose.